Ojibwa, and Potawatomi nations. Other tribes such as the Miami, Ho Chunk, Sac, and Fox also call this area home. And if you want to learn more about Indigenous lands, you can check out a link that I will drop in the chat for future references. I will pass it on to Sara so they can introduce our speaker, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jazmin. Yes, today our guest speaker is Washieka Torres. Washieka is a disability rights scholar, activist, and documentarian. That's all I'll say. I'll turn it over to you, Washieka, if you want to expand on that. And thank you for being here.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited that I was asked to be here, and that my work and the work of people that I do collaborate with is being recognized more and more. And I think it's really important because it's an under researched and a kind of underexplored area. And so hopefully today, people who are watching or listening can get more in-depth information. And this is really just the start. I hope that the information you take with you helps you grow and deepen your understanding of what, kind of food justice and food sovereignty is, but also what that means for people with disabilities and the experiences that they face. So I have pre-written remarks, which I don't normally do. So this is only my second time having pre-written remarks, so just bear with me if I go a little off script or if I stumble. Usually, I've been giving talks for a couple of years now, but usually I use a little bit of written material, and then I will move to extemporaneously through my presentations. But to ensure this was as accessible as it could be, I wanted to make sure that I spoke in a way that was natural for me, but also easy for me to read as well, which isn't as easy as I would hope. But with that in mind, let's go into the presentation. So my name is Washieka Torres, and I will be presenting about food sovereignty and what food sovereignty means for people with disabilities. So I always have an agenda that I like to start with. Keeps me on task. It keeps me accountable when I veer off the agenda. It allows people to start thinking about what they want me to say or any remarks they'd like me to fill in areas that I didn't fully explain. So the first thing I want to talk about is, myself. I'll give you a bit more about who I am. And then I'll talk about, what food sovereignty is, how that impacts the world around us, and current socio-economic and political conversations as well. Then I'll move into kind of what food justice is and how we can create a more food just society. Then we'll discuss why these concepts of food justice and food sovereignty, as they are currently really difficult for some people with disabilities. Or disabled people, whichever term you're used to using. I use them interchangeably. Next, we'll look at what's being done to alleviate the problem. How do we play a hand in that? How do we practice food sovereignty? And then, I'll talk a little bit about the other things I'm working on and trying to develop over time to address food sovereignty, and speaking to other people is kind of just one part of that. And then I'll open it up to, we can have Q&A. And if, I either can't hear a question or it's hard, you can leave your questions in the chat for me to read out loud. But sometimes I'll just read them aloud again. But yeah, I can pretty much just read the chat box first and then see if other people have questions like that they want to say without typing in the chat. So as before, my name is Washieka Torres. I'm now a third-year PhD student at the University of Illinois at Chicago in their Disability Studies program. So I'm a documentarian. As I said before, I actually filmed a documentary about food access and disability in Mississippi. And I was actually there for about a month speaking to different people, elected officials about food access and the ways in which people with disabilities have hindered their food access while looking at the cultural landscape of Jackson, Mississippi. I'm also an activist. I've been a disability activist for over 10 years now, about 13. And I started when I was an undergraduate at the College of Staten Island in New York, part of the City University of New York system. I've also written a few grants. I'm always on the lookout for other grants. I was working on one and then like for a class and stuff. And then I'm always looking for other grants that allow me to really spread the word about access and equity not just equality, but equity, which is, giving people what they need, not giving everyone the same thing, because some people need more, some people need less, giving people what they need and want, desire. I'm also a business owner. I started a hair care, skincare company in Chicago, which is going a lot slower than I'd hoped because I started in 2020, right before the pandemic really hit hard. I've been working on the products for years now. And so the formulas are fine. It's just really getting it out there. And I'm nervous, optimistic, excited. I feel a lot of feelings. Um, so, what is food sovereignty? Let me open with that. I have a video and I'm going to link it and then we're going to watch it about people reading the 7 principles of food sovereignty, which was created by the Via Campesina, which I may be mispronouncing. I'm sorry. But pretty much, food sovereignty is the right of people to define their own food and agriculture. And this concept is done with the goal of creating sustainable communities that are culturally appropriate for the people that live in those communities. And they have sustainable objectives and things like that. So I'm actually going to go, 1 second. One moment. Am I in the chat? I'll just share my screen in a moment and the sound so you can see the video, and then I'll just talk through it for some people who need like multimodal ways of taking in information. I can just do that as well. Also, the captions are auto-generated, which is why I don't have them on. Normally I would, but they are not that good.
Via Campesina's 7 Principles of Food Sovereignty. Number 1, food, a basic human right. Everyone must have access to safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food in sufficient quantity and quality to sustain a healthy life with full human dignity. Each nation should declare that access to food is a constitutional right and guarantee the development of the primary sector to ensure the concrete realization of this fundamental right.
Food sovereignty. Number 2, Agrarian Reform. A genuine agrarian reform is necessary, which gives landless and farming people, especially women, ownership and control of the land they work and returns territory to indigenous peoples. The right to land must be free of discrimination on the basis of gender, religion, race, social class, or ideology. The land belongs to the people who work it.
Food sovereignty. Number 3, it says protecting natural resources. Food sovereignty entails the sustainable care and use of natural resources, especially land, water, and seeds, and livestock breeds. The people who work the land must have the right to practice sustainable management of natural resources and to conserve biodiversity free of restrictive and intellectual property rights. This can only be done from a sound economic basis with security of tenure, healthy soils, and reduced usage of agrochemicals.
7 Principles of Food Sovereignty. Number 4, reorganizing the food trade. Food is first and foremost a source of nutrition, and only secondarily an item of trade. National agricultural policies must prioritize production for domestic consumption and food self-sufficiency. Food imports must not displace local production nor depress prices.
Via Campesina's 7 Principles of Food Sovereignty. Number 5, ending the globalization of hunger. Food sovereignty is undermined by multilateral institutions and by speculative capital. The growing control of multinational corporations over agricultural policies has been facilitated by the economic policies of multilateral organizations such as the WTO, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Regulation and taxation of speculative capital and a strictly enforced code of conduct for transnational corporations is therefore needed.
Number 6 is social peace. Everyone has the right to be free from violence. Food must not be used as a weapon. Increasing levels of poverty and marginalization in the countryside, along with the growing oppression of ethnic minorities and indigenous populations, aggravate situations of injustice and hopelessness. The ongoing displacement, forced urbanization, repression, and increasing incidence of racism of smallholder farmers cannot be tolerated.
I want to read number 7, democratic control. Smallholders farmers must have the direct input into formulation agricultural policy at all levels. The United Nations and related organizations will have to undergo a process of democratization to enable this become a reality. Everyone have a right to honest, accurate information and open democratic decision making.
All right, there we go. So there are a number of videos that do kind of go into more depth, but I did want to just give everyone a kind of a basis of being able to kind of just hear these are what the principles are. One moment, let me go back to my notes. And as you can hear in the video, there are kind of, it's very, the goals are good and lofty, but there are groups of people that are left out. So the goal of creating these sustainable communities, that are culturally appropriate for people. They have sustainable development objectives that determine to the extent they want to be self-reliant. There's a restriction of dumping products in markets, which is very common when you're looking at poor farmers and the dietary choices that they have, or when you're looking at poor people, and the dietary choices that they have based on the stores that are around them and the stores they have access to. And when you're looking at transportation and pricing, providing local fisheries with community-based priorities, when it comes to managing the use and rights of waterways or any kind of aquatic resources. That's also very important because when you think about agricultural runoff. Promotion of trade policies that serve the rights of people to safe, healthy, remember that, safe, healthy, and ecological sustainability in their food production. And a lot of this is about, culturally appropriate food, which is it's a lot easier to see when we're speaking about some ethnic and racial issues. And a lot of food sovereignty scholars will generally talk about that, right? Ethnic, racial issues or indigenous people and the ways in which they've had their sovereignty taken from them, in many ways, including financially, but in also the terms of what food that they can eat and grow and the control they have or don't over the aspects of their lives. And there's a long documented history of, indigenous people being forcibly removed from their culturally appropriate food, fisheries, waterways. And so food sovereignty looks at ways of mitigating that and correcting that. And so I'm going to reread the 7 principles. So the first is a recognition that food is a basic human right. Everyone must have access to safe, nutritious, culturally appropriate food, sufficient quantity and quality to sustain a healthy life with full human dignity. And each nation, however nation is defined, should make it a constitutional right to ensure that that happens. Agrarian reform recognizes that reform is necessary. If you're kind of looking at the protests happening in India right now with farmers and the farm laws that are changing, think about that. And to ensure large companies and corporations are not controlling the types of food that are grown, the nutrition of the food that is grown, and pricing the food in a way that makes food and food access a barrier for people who need it. The third is about protecting natural resources, and that goes hand in hand with sustainable care of the land, harvesting, using natural resources in a way that's not detrimentally depleting the land. I actually was watching something that said about 1/3 of land that was once farmable, the topsoil of 1/3 of land just is deplete of nutrition. But it's a way that works with nature, not against it, right? The fourth is a call for the reorganization of food trade, and that food should not be seen as a commodity primarily, right, to be sold, but as a resource of nutrition that's to be given. And that means that states and nations should ensure that their nations can eat rather than focus on food production for export and profit. And I actually do want to share a very interesting story about the potato famine. So most people think that during the potato famine that just, people were just, dying in the streets and weren't able to feed themselves. And that is all true, but England was still taking exports from Ireland. So even during the midst of people suffering, England, which had dominion over Ireland at the time, was still taking resources for themselves from that country. So think of that. Think about the fact that on the one hand, you have people who cannot feed themselves and their children and they're starving and there's this blight and they have to leave in droves. But then you have this colonizing force that is still extracting food resources from them. So under the guidelines of food sovereignty, that would stop. The priority is we have a blight. We are not exporting food as a commodity. Food is not primarily seen as a commodity. We're making sure that our people are fed with this food. So that's something to think about. 5 is ending the globalization of hunger. And as I said before, a lot of countries, including this one, have massive issues with food insecurity and poverty and malnutrition. And a lot of countries also export a decent amount of food as opposed to reorganizing the system to ensure that the food grown in that country can go to those who need it first. The excess can go other places that need it and can't grow those things, and that's fine. But the priority is ensuring that people are fed rather than profits being had. The 6th one was social peace, and that everyone has a right to be free from violence and that food must not be used as a weapon. Oftentimes you'll have food scandals with different types of charities or NGOs because they use food and access to food and prioritization of who gets food as a weapon. They'll gain access to areas and people they normally wouldn't have. So there have been plenty of scandals, globally, or, oh, if you allow us to have a church or do missionary work here, then you can get the food that we get to distribute. Although the food they get to distribute is supposed to be distributed anyway. Something like that. And there are plenty of examples across the board that you can look at. There's been food for oil scandals. There's been other types of food scandals. So that is kind of what addresses that. And the 7th is democratic control. And it reads that farmers should have control over their own lands and have direct input into how food and other agrarian things that are happening to their land in regards to direct decision making, especially with consideration to rural women, where that's not, sometimes the case, right? So you'll have levels of marginalization. And so for democratic control, we want to recenter those who are marginalized in the decision making process. So, and this is also because a lot of farms, although there are maybe lots of small farms, they're managed by larger farm corporations. And sometimes it does hurt farmers. If we're looking at, for instance, chickens, there's been a lot of issues with people who grow chickens or certain crops that suffer, and they suffer when there's an economic downturn. So if you are this company buys your farm because you couldn't compete with them, and then all of a sudden you're working for this company, like you need to process this many chickens or this many things, and you either can't meet demand or there's an economic downturn for chickens or some other crop, then you're in trouble. Whereas if you were a small farmer, you had, without corporate control, you could have had a diversity of crops to kind of, okay, I'll boost this one for next season and I'll downplay this one to kind of go with trends, but you can't do that because you don't have democratic control over the land that you are growing on. And so, yeah, they'll have this disproportionate burden rather than the larger factory farms because they can kind of write off these losses, move them around, make more money in other places, but the smaller farmers are definitely suffering. So next up is food justice, and this is a little bit shorter, but it's more nuanced. So food justice is often seen as a pathway to food sovereignty, and that's kind of how I see that. And the food justice movement seeks to address injustices that disproportionately have an impact on people based on race, class, and things like that, whether it's through education or boycotting or other kinds of cooperative means, and I'll kind of go into that. And I'll also have a link to a video here, and we're going to talk about children in metropolitan areas. And they came together to create a community garden on a vacant land. on vacant land. This process of turning the lot into the garden was actually a lot more than what it shows you in the clip. It's short, but it doesn't seem easy depending on where you live. And I'll kind of go into that in a moment after we watch the video, which is right here. And there's a link to it in the PowerPoints that I've sent. Oh, I didn't like that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we
I
can't
am
see it
not
yet.
sharing the screen. I just realized I'm giggling and I'm like, oh, this is so great.
No
One
worries.
moment. Let me share this screen. It is really cute. Sorry.
It's not recording.
Yes, it is.
It's really not.
It says record.
We flipped, in our generation, we eat out every day of the week and maybe cook every now and then.
Right, total reversal.
It's the total reversal. So if we go back to doing what our grandparents did, more, you always had 2-3 vegetables with dinner when grandma was cooking.
Right.
All our folks didn't fight this hard for us to get to this point to find that the biggest threat to our children today could be their own health.
I was watching TV the other day and I seen Michelle Obama's commercial for community gardens. And I was thinking to myself, the same thing that she was talking about, we were actually putting it into effect. Educating your community about unhealthy foods and actually fixing the problem and supplying the community with healthy foods. Her words were be putting into action through the Black Male Youth Academy.
So these young men who became our first group of graduates said, Mr. Scorza, we want to do something to improve our community, right? We know what we're capable of, and we want to let the world know. One of the young men suggested doing a community garden. After going through the ideas, all the young men were like, that's actually a pretty good idea.
The community garden is important because it's giving the community an opportunity to eat healthy. Just in case they wasn't able to go down to the supermarket and be able to afford the vegetables and fruits that's within the supermarket, they could go down to community garden.
So we got permission from the district and the administration, and then we broke ground.
The garden. Summertime. Last summer, the summer that just passed. All I was doing was the garden. Garden. It was so hard. Hot, sweaty, pain in the back.
The garden, before we put all the work and effort into it, was nothing but a flat, big, desolate area with nothing but gravel and a big stone square in the middle.
It was just like a bunch of cement, crumbles, and rocks everywhere, dirt.
As they began to turn this land over and dig into this gravel, they started finding things like broken crack pipes.
There was a lot of trash and broken bottles and cans and
knives on the site. And they were like, we don't want this stuff in our community. We don't want crack pipes in our community. So they cleaned that lot up. They cleaned that space up.
Then we had to break this concrete up, this solid piece of concrete. We had to dig around it and break it up.
Moving the mulch around, watering, I've done digging.
Then we start to level ground, start to have to use the axe.
They got rid of that debris and turned it into a paradise. These young men and the students in the school learned what they were capable of. They learned what they could do.
It's a big accomplishment because just to see that we can make that big of a change, it shows the community, like, if we can take that lot and turn it into a garden, what else can we change about the community? Like, what else can we do to turn the community into a positive direction?
Even though I was out there every day of my life, no beach time, but it kept me out of trouble. So I appreciate that.
People throughout the city are coming to ask us how we did it and how we can help them make that happen, because they were the first ones to create a community garden in the city.
So it is good, huh?
Very tasty.
Did you help grow that?
I helped grow everything in this garden, help build,
that right there, the shed, help build the deck, help build this whole garden.
So, ooh, okay, there we go. So I really like that video. I really thought that it was really like interesting. Um, so the process of, like I said, it's really short. It's like really short of what you have to do, but there's other stuff you have to do. Like you have to do a soil test. There's certain permits you have to get and maintain. In the process, there's terms of zoning for gardens or businesses. So no matter what kind of businesses, there can be issues with aldermen. So in New York, we don't have aldermen. We do city council members, but the amount of control they have versus aldermen is very different. So those are, very different depending on where you live. And when I moved here, hearing about kind of how much control aldermen have over the ground, where things go, and things like that was very much a surprise. But yeah, so sometimes it can be an uphill battle, depending on the type of neighborhood it's in. So food justice in that regard may be difficult, but there's lots of other ways to create a food just society. And so for me, I'm thinking, food sovereignty is the destination. Food justice is the roadmap to get there. It helps to guide you and direct us to create a more food sovereign nation. So one way is food co-ops. And so food co-op is like a store, it's collectively owned. And so the success or failures of the company are, they're measured through community engagement, things like that. Sometimes the members work there, but the community shops at the store and people collectively reap the benefits, right? And if you're part of a co-op, you have decision-making power. You can decide what products are in the store, what products are not, what companies you will and won't support, and what stances you like. So if you have a store and you only want products that are cruelty-free, never tested on animals, that would be a policy, right? And you're like, well, that's how we create this justice or something like that. And those are the kind of the guidelines for purchasing. If you're a member of the co-op, you also be able to get items cheaper generally. But the point is to keep money and decision-making circulating within the community itself. So some co-ops do it well, some don't. There's a co-op in New York, and they had a bit of a scandal because it was in a very wealthy neighborhood. And people who were supposed to be, the co-op members who were supposed to be working turns at the store, which is part of the policy to be a member of the co-op, they were sending like housekeepers or maids or people who watch their children to work their hours for them. Those people are not members of the co-op. Those people do not get the benefits of being co-op members because they're not. But that was a problem. Now it has been addressed. There was another controversy about products from certain countries in that co-op as well. Are we going to allow products from certain countries in the store? Because if we accept these products, are we also accepting their political stances? So that may be something too. If you don't want products from countries that have really bad scores or ratings in terms of, equity and gender parity, race, disability, unemployment rates, the living conditions of disabled people, that is also a stance. And that's also something you all speak about as co-op members. So I'm actually part of two co-ops. One is a Black retail co-op in South Shore called the Black Mall. And, what we mostly have are products from people people who are co-op members. A lot of them do have businesses or their families are trying to start a business, and you get a display space in the store. You get a small space in the store and you can sell your products. And it's not in a competitive way, but in a collaborative way. Because if you go to other stores, they have 50 million of the same product. And, they can easily, they're not, in this huge competition with one another. So it's more of a collaborative thing in terms of Black products and things like that, and trying to help boost the economy of South Shore. I'm also part of another one that's recently started called the South Shore Food Co-op. So that's more focused on food. And I'm one of the few members who really does bring up a lot of disability stuff. So that's the accessibility stuff is something I'll be heading up. Like, is the store accessible? How do you connect with disabled members in the community to do a community survey? Because it's easier to fix the stuff in the process of purchasing the building and making the changes rather than making them later on. We want to offer food boxes. Okay, well, we have food boxes where someone can cut up the food so that they're still getting fresh food that's cut up, but not at a premium price like supermarkets do. Because if we're trying to change the narrative and give as many people access as possible, think about the people we're trying to give as much access as possible to. Think about all of those people. And it was received so well. People really loved those ideas about making sure that all members of the community included, right? It wasn't a, oh, well, there's so few. There were no excuses. They immediately went, yes, you're right. I know people who may have an issue. And even if I don't know people, this is a really great idea because that's the goal of the co-op. The goal of the co-op is to create food equity in this area and hope to open other stores that have the same food equity policies. So so there's that in terms of co-ops. Another popular one is boycotting. There are a few companies that don't have sustainable or equitable practices. A lot of them use prison labor, or they don't have safe working conditions, have lots of work violations, but they pay fines and no one does anything. Or there's not enough people in the federal, bureaus to do these investigations. So for instance, Driscoll Farms, if you know them, people boycott them all the time. They, because of the treatments of their farmers, or because they're not paying, better, an equitable wage that's in line with the labor they're doing. So that's one big company that you'll see that happen a lot with. Companies that I remember I got a box. I'm not going to tell you the food description company. Oh, you can kind of I'll answer the question today. I saw something pop up in the chat. But I used to get a food subscription box. I'm not gonna tell you which one because almost all of them did this. It's like food that isn't that great, blah, 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 blah. There's a couple of companies like that. And they send me a note saying, oh, some of your food might have soot on it. And I was like, what? Yeah, some of the food we get in are from workers working through the Sonoran fires. So they're still in the field working through the fires for us, and we're sending you the food. And I was like, or some of the food you get might have that. And I opened it and I saw this lettuce and it just had soot all over it. And I was like, someone was literally in the field all day. The skies are red with like a face mask on, bent down picking this. I was like, I can't do this. I can't. I cannot support this. And it was it shook me because I'm holding this and I'm really just thinking of, because I'd seen pictures of it, the skies being red and then people still working in the fields. And I was like, I can't support this. So I don't use that company anymore. I was like, I can't do this. Right. So, boycotting, and if enough people do that, that does send a message. So a lot of things that, people may know, farm workers don't have a union or union capabilities because a lot of farm workers have mixed immigration statuses. And so people take advantage of that in many ways. Sexual assault, underpaid wages, threatening people, calling certain types of services, federal or otherwise, on people, forcing them to work during those conditions. So what we have to do, and I mean, see fires in California, I had mentioned in my notes, even with COVID, there's still farm workers and they're working despite being sick, despite needing to take time off. So one way to force the hand is those who can boycott, those who can vote with their dollar, do so. And that has been successful in some places where you are, you're seeing, or that, okay, this is, our profits are down and people are specifically saying it's because of your labor practices. And then sometimes you have these campaigns where the state finally will step in and do something about it, but it really does take us to continue to push and push and push. So exactly. So whatever you can do, right? So now, we can talk about why these movements have been kind of exclusionary to people with disabilities. There's actually a woman, Natasha Simpson, actually wrote a short piece about how justice movements have excluded people with disabilities. And there's a few reasons. One big thing is ableism. So ableism is discrimination against people with disabilities. And one big reason is the idea of disabled people not having their own agency or the capability to make their own decisions, or because they cannot physically do some certain things in the same way as able-bodied people, not wanting to make accommodations or adaptations. So a lot of their opinions have been disregarded over time, and that is supported by the media. There's media assumptions about how disabled people, with how they eat, what they eat, why. So if you watch a film, you may see people with disabilities. Do you see them cooking? I mean, you might see them eating, but do you see them cooking or grocery shopping or directly engaging in the food making process? Or are they simply given and being served food? Right? This is important because if you're just seeing disabled people as passive consumers of goods rather than active buyers and consumers of goods, then you're saying, well, they're pretty much just like children. And a lot of movements have also left out children's voices, right? Like in the Campesina conversation, they didn't talk about children, but child labor in farming is there, right? It's around, it's prevalent. So, and that's kind of how that is. Um, History of food advertisement, you will see a lot of things advertised to women or to families, right? But they're not generally disabled, or they're not disabled at all, right? They're these fully able-bodied people who are enthusiastically pushing carts around and down the aisles and so happy to just be able to shop for this thing and reach on these tall shelves or reach really low or go to the butcher and all these things. Um, and that leads to a kind of misunderstanding about needs versus luxuries. So let me get into why I actually started this work. I saw this article of this woman who was making fun of Whole Foods having pre-peeled oranges. She was saying it was lazy, and all this backlash and groundswell eventually got them pulled off the shelves. But then NPR had done an article, and another woman who was disabled herself wrote a blog like, these things, yes, this is priced high because it's Whole Foods, but these things are what people need. They're not luxuries, right? They shouldn't be priced as luxuries because people have needs for them. They have a need for them. Either that or they're going to have to get frozen or canned food, which is not, it's not, even if the nutrition value was the same, it's not what disabled people want. They want equitable and equal access to the foods that non-disabled people have equal and equitable access to. And, that is something that society doesn't make happen because we're not seeing them as consumers. They're not a consideration. When you think about how wide or narrow the aisles are, how high or low the shelves are, that's kind of that too, right? So these things are a necessity in order for people to be able to access food. But because they're not seen as primary shoppers or cookers of food, they're seen, pre-cut fruit, vegetables, meat are quick convenience items. So they're priced like that. And that means people have to use frozen or canned food. So, but overall, one big factor in the overall health of people with disabilities and barriers is the kind of food that they're eating and have access to, and what they can make and eat themselves. Another big issue is political power. A lot of states have rules or access structures in place that inhibit people with disabilities access to voting or decision making. So maybe that's you're having a town hall in a building that's not accessible, or you have a voting in a building that's not fully accessible, even though people say all of them are. Actually, Equip for Equality goes around and checks to make sure they are. In some places, aren't really fully accessible. It shuts disabled people out of being able to exercise their right as full citizens, right? And the political powers and responsibility that comes with that. I actually didn't know, people with dementia are allowed to vote. But there may be people who, or they may be in nursing homes, may not go to those may not go to those people because they're like, oh, I am saying because you have a diminished capacity, quote unquote, you're not going to be able to vote, right? And I'm not going to give you the form to register. I'm not going to give you a ballot. Some people are blind and they need different ballots. Oh, well, we don't have any. Oh, can someone assist me? No, I'm sorry. And, that again, that's shutting people out of the process. So people who need plain language kind of summaries of these long, how many judges? So many judges, and they may need help with things. They're really left out of that process. And that's not fair. That's not equal. And that's not equitable. right? So another is the service from grocery stores. From store to store, it's not comprehensive at all. Some stores have customer service for the whole time the store is open. Some don't. So sometimes if I go to a customer service counter, it may be closed because they're open maybe 8 hours and the store is 24 or something like that. Some stores have a policy where you're supposed to call ahead and get a designated time to go, but when you get there, no one's there. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't pull someone off the floor. Well, I had to take paratransit to get here. I had to take Pace or Accessoride or something, or a cab or something to get here, and now I can't shop. I had to pay for this, and now my whole trip time is wasted, right? Because you said, and this was your policy, but when I get here, now it's a different story. Also, sometimes if you see those carts, the carts that some people use, they're not fully charged. When it's parked, it's supposed to be charged and charged up. I've seen times where like the whole row of them is just dead. And people are like, well, what am I going to do now? You know, I planned on coming here and being able to shop using these carts, and it's dead. And people do use them, right? And some people, there are times when like you'll see little kids kind of using them and no one says anything. Like they're like kind of riding around like joyriding, and the employee's like, whatever, it's fine. Not actually, because when someone who needs to kind of sit down and actually shop in the cart needs to use the cart, then it's dead. So that can get really annoying really quickly. So that's the problem. You don't have full access to services, and you should. Another one I've recently come across now is when I order stuff for delivery. The snow was piled to my waist on the west side. I could not go further than my block. So I had to get food delivered, groceries delivered. And I realized online, they don't give you full access to the stuff in the store, even if it's on the shelves. Like I was trying to order cat treats, and they're like, oh, not available for curbside. You have to come in. How? I can't get off my block, right? And even if I could, there are sometimes when people can't. They can't go to the store, but the website is promising you're going to get the same level of access. You can buy everything you would have bought. It's the same as going into the grocery store, but then it's not. Then you find out it's actually not the same as going into the grocery store. That's lots of issues. There's lots of barriers. The interface is not the same. You can't call and ask questions. You can't get any help. You can't, there's a lot of things you cannot do. So no, you're not having equal and equitable access. Also, sometimes you'll tell them, do not leave my food at the door and go, because I live on the 3rd floor. If you leave my food and just go, I'm not going to know. But people still do it anyway, even though you'll have directives saying, don't do that. I had a friend, 8 bags left outside her house, like outside her building. And she doesn't have a shopping cart. Usually they bring it upstairs. They were like, oh, sorry. And they called her like after they were gone. 8 grocery bags she had to haul upstairs herself each time and hope nobody took her groceries as she made those trips up and down. So, that happens. So another big issue, we talked about buildings not being accessible. City planning is not done necessarily with people with disabilities in mind. So if you're planning a supermarket, you might have multiple levels. They don't have an elevator. When I was in Bowling Green, I went to a supermarket in the next town. Supermarket was new. It was relatively new. It had been built maybe the last 5 years, if that much. Multiple levels, but the second level, you had to go up the stairs. You couldn't use an elevator. There wasn't an elevator. So it's hard to get up and down the stairs if you're carrying something, because how am I going to take a shopping cart up there? I can't. But imagine if you're in a wheelchair and you're just like, or even if you're not, if you have issues climbing stairs, or you have a walker or something like that. So whatever's up there is just going to stay up there. So I don't just want to talk about problems. I do want to talk about solutions, right? I want to talk about what's being done. I try and keep my ear to the ground, and stuff like that, like what's happening around the country. There's other disability rights activists, and they share information about this stuff all the time. So I have a friend who created accessible community gardens, or who worked on a project. She's from Michigan. Her name is Ava. And they wanted to make sure they were accessible because it was really important. And so they actually, the organization planning it and the disabled people in the community worked on planning it from start to finish. So they decided, okay, well, we want raised garden beds. They're going to have to be narrower than normal raised garden beds are. And if they're coming up from the ground, like they're going to have to be taller, they're going to be longer to make up for the lack of width. And we're going to have it on concrete, right? If we're having it from the ground up. So, and then we're going to have chairs there, but it's also going to be wide enough for 2 motorized wheelchairs to go through. So that's how they planned the garden. They also have, I thought this was so cool. It's like a Ferris wheel for like smaller herbs. So instead of having like, oh, I have to reach down to get these herbs or that herbs off the ground, it's like a Ferris wheel with like a long, thin potting tray, and each one will have herbs. So parsley will be that one, cilantro will be the next one, then like basil, that kind of thing. And it was, yeah, it's a great idea. I just saw this pop up in the chat. It's amazing, right? But this is the thing, it was done with disabled community members. I've talked to Access Living, which is a center for independent living. There's that's one big one in the city. And we actually did something called the Garden of Dreams. What do you want to see in a garden? And it wasn't just vegetables. They're like, we want flowers. We want a place to sit down and look at all this stuff. I have a friend in Ravenwood. They decided to do movable garden beds. They got them from Home Depot. They're narrow so people can reach across. You can move them wherever you need to. They're on stilts. They're very light too. They're made of a fairly light wood, but they're sturdy. They have lasted 3-4 Chicago winters. And people can grow there. There's other little pots people can use. There's seats around the edges. There's shaded areas. But again, with the community, with the disabled people in the building, decision-making happened for the rooftop garden. And then, so I thought that was really great. You see, so yeah, looking for visibility projects, it's kind of sometimes hard in the wake of COVID-19, but there are organizations to look for instance, typing in emergency planning for people with disabilities, COVID-19 planning for people with disabilities, and that will definitely reveal glaring issues with some plans, some evacuation plans, some COVID continuity plans, but you can also find activists speaking about issues with those plans and what they're doing and how to, things like that. Social media campaigns, collectives, there's this one I'm part of, it's called Ecology and Disability, Extending Access to the More Than Human World. And that's in the PowerPoint. And there's also another one, Inclusive Food Justice Education Network. I've given a talk with them. They're also doing that stuff. And all of these things, they are really putting us on the path to a more kind of equitable food sovereignty destination for disabled people, right? Also, if you see an issue of inequality, document it. If you see something wrong, unjust, let people know what's happening, right? Like again, with the farmer workers, we have these levels of privilege and avenues to access that so many people don't. And I love this one about the internet is forever, right? Having these digital campaigns, people can see them again. They can look up the handles or the hashtags, all those things, and they can see what people drew and did and videos and things like that, expose them for their histories of bad behavior, of neglect and things like that. Getting political. There are some people very apolitical, but everybody's political, right? Everything has politics with it. Rent, landlord and tenant rights, people who own businesses, zoning laws, taxes, and a lot of those have control over what you can and can't do with your community. So you don't have to get formally involved, but get involved with your community. Do they have a community board, a community center? We're part of this global society. So how are we looking at our neighborhood? How are we looking at other neighborhoods? How are we kind of seeing what they're doing and how we can kind of work together or, collaborate or kind of do that kind of thing. I thought that was really good. I'm trying to see. Oh, supporting, if you see a market or a marketplace or a farmer's market that has great customer service, let people know. This store did a really good job with this. Other stores need to do this, blah, blah, blah. The competition looks at one another and they say, well, if they have an adjusted height counter for people who are using wheelchairs, let's make sure we have at least one. If they have self-checkout counters that are like this, let's make sure we have one. If they have this service, let's make sure we have this service. You know, like for instance, the COVID, the early services for people with disabilities who are immunocompromised, like the kind of first few hours of the store being designated for them because, you know, they're worried about getting sick. It started off with a few stores, and now almost every store does it. People who are autistic and who have sensory overload issues, some stores have quiet times and quiet hours where the lights are a little bit lower, they're not playing all that music, and it just spreads. It spreads. So showing the good and showing the bad, you know, really gets the word out there. So I would like people to do that. Shopping at co-ops can also really help. But there's another thing. Oh my gosh, I have to talk to you about. I know I'm going over time. So listening to disabled people and their needs is the only way I've been able to do this work. For all of these years, it always started out with listening, and it will always end with listening, and just really just pushing what people, you know, what disabled people do. What do they want? What do they need? Where do I fit in? What can I help with? Straws. I'm just gonna say this. Leave people's need for straws alone. Like suggesting alternatives. There are disabled people who have gone through a gambit of alternatives and things. They know what's best for them, right? And I do also want to say 70% of pollution is caused by corporations. These things are necessities, they're not luxuries. It makes up like less than 4% of the garbage in the ocean. Most of it is made up by fishing nets, like commercial fishing nets. They cut the nets and just let them sink to the bottom of the ocean. So, right? Like it is such it's such a distraction. I've actually seen, you know, stories of people who've been getting harassed. Some restaurants won't offer it automatically. You have to ask, and some people will refuse to give it to you. They feel like you don't need it. You don't know someone's needs. They know their needs. Like for me, I use straws because my teeth are sensitive. They trigger my migraines. So if I have something that's too cold, my migraine is triggered, and I'm for at least a day or two, right? And I, you know, to some people like, well, use this other kind of straw, use that other kind of straw. Other kind of straws don't always work. I've tried metal straws. If you could see my teeth, you would see they're chipped, right? I've tried alternatives, and those haven't worked, right? I'll keep looking for alternatives, but I know for me, and they're for other people who just, they can't for whatever reason, and it doesn't matter. Listen to disabled people. They know their needs. They have been living their life. So that has been such a big thing that I wanted to tell you. And I do, like I said, I have a copy. I just have so much more and I went so over, but I do want to have time for questions. I don't want to just take up all the time you hearing the sound of my voice, just to blab, you know, kind of trailing on. But I do want to go to the chat and look at the questions.
Thank you so much, Washieka. I feel like you gave us a lot to think about, a lot to consider. You did have one question about if you happen to have a list of those companies that you mentioned that have questionable practices.
Well, there's so many corporations that list of companies are bad for me. Interesting, called Farm Babe. 8 companies that don't deserve our money, but you can literally look at companies of bad farming practices. So I'm gonna let's see. I can just give you this link and it can just take you to so many places. One second, let me so like this gives you just 8 companies, right? You will fall down the rabbit hole. I'm telling you, you will. It was horrifying. Yeah, seeing that dirt after reading all the stories and just kind of touching that, and like the fact that the company, just because they sent me a letter, they thought I'd be okay. And the fact that I don't know what bothers me more, that they thought I'd be okay, or that this was not a big enough thing, a big enough scandal for other people to not be okay. Like I didn't see anything about it online about backlash against the company for using are getting vegetables that were farmed, you know, by you know, migrant workers in the Sonoran fires.
Yeah, that's
It was awful. It was
Yeah.
imperfect foods. Just gonna put that out there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, to be
Yeah,
honest.
it wasn't Misfit Market. It wasn't Ugly Produce. It was, yeah, working directly, and that's what I do. That is so much of my work. I couldn't. I mean, there are some people who don't. There are different types of activists, and there are some people who don't have the most direct contact with the community. But for me, that's just my method, right? And that's how I've been getting involved in like hearing stories. And I'm a big stories person. I think stories connect us and they can show us who we are and the similarities or differences, or they really illuminate a problem. Because I think when you look at data points, right, I can tell you that there are XYZ number, like 54 million people with disabilities in this country, right? And that's a conservative estimate because of how, depending on how we define disability, right? And I can tell you about people having issues with access to grocery stores, but I can also tell you stories of people who have had issues, of people who have gone to customer service and, oh, I'm sorry, right? Or of people who've gotten help. People when I go to, where's that? The Jewel Osco on Roosevelt by UIC, Roosevelt and Ashland. Yeah, Roosevelt and Ashland. Really great service. I have friends, different disabilities. They're like, no, that place is great. I actually like, even if they don't live near there, they go to that Jewel Osco because every time they go, there's someone there to help them. And I've seen that. Like I've seen there's a woman, there's working like, oh yeah, they'll just talk to them and they'll be like, oh, what do you need? Da, da, da. And they're having a conversation while they're going down the aisles, and it's amazing, right? And then there's just some places where it's like, sorry, we can't pull anyone off the floor. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just amazing.
Yeah, there's actually a question in the chat in relation to the points that you just mentioned, and they're asking, is there awards or recognitions for commercial stores that are doing a good job? How
I
can
do
we
know
support
there
companies?
are some customer service awards that stores get. I think I'm not sure if it's smaller or bigger chains, because where I'm from, we have a lot of independent chains. And here there are a lot of local chains. There are a few big ones, like of course Walmart and Food for Less is owned by Kroger. But there are generally, for customer service, there are some awards, and I've seen those in stores. Like if you go to the customer service desk, we won this award for great customer service. And it's sometimes between stores. So it may be like this Pete's Market, out of all the Pete's Markets, got this best customer service award for this year or that year. So yeah, there are some times when you can do that. Let's see. Yeah. It can be frustrating when you don't, but it's interesting because those are labeled luxuries, but then sometimes like the pre-cut apples, the ones that you kind of give to kids, they're not labeled that way. And they're not always priced that as, that way or seen that way. So it really is, there's this huge divide on how we're talking about pre-cut food, meats, and where I'm from in the South Bronx, you can just go to the butcher and have them cut up the meat. The price isn't extra, it's free. Or the fruit isn't that much more if it's pre-cut. But here, when I moved to the Midwest, the price difference is astronomical, and there's not really a great justification for that. There's something Q&A. How can educators from their classrooms support and encourage food sovereignty initiatives in their communities? Well, you can see if any are happening. You can look at local community centers in the district you're teaching. So that would be a really good way to do that. So are there community centers there? What are they doing, and how can you get involved? Another person. Will I be sharing the link? It's in the, oh yeah, sorry. Okay, great. Not sure how to begin meeting engaging with my community on existing community projects, considering we're still in a pandemic. Well, some are having meetings. So my food co-op, we had virtual meetings. I have never met these people in person in my life. But we have virtual meetings. So you can see what town halls are happening. Like you said, a lot of them are virtual now. Seeing what town halls are happening, that is a great way to figure that out too. In your community, say, hey, I'm new to the community. I'm really interested in getting engaged. Many hands make light work. And believe me, a lot of communities, especially on projects, are always looking for a helping hand with initiatives that need to be reinvigorated, or if you're bringing some new ideas that people might like, that'd be great too.
Thank you so much. Before we start to wrap up, do you have any announcements, any events we should be looking out for? How can we continue to follow your work?
Well, I need to build a website, which is what everyone says, but I need help with that. There are some things I'm really good at. The website for my business is very basic, so website building is not one of those things. But if you want to contact me, people can get my email address and I will, respond as best I can. I am a full-time grad student, so sometimes it's hard, but I will. Just one moment.
We'll make sure to share that information with attendees once we send out the recording and all that.
It just got really loud outside. I wanted to mute myself, but yeah, so definitely. And I'm trying to, there's a project I've been trying to get off the ground for like 2 years, but the pandemic has really put a hold on it. But I am, if anyone, knows of any events where they would, like more information or anything in the presentation they'd like more information on, again, please contact me. Sometimes people have answers or questions afterwards after they process stuff. So I fully understand that happens. But yeah, so I'm really, really happy that I was asked to speak and I'm excited.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jazmin, do you have any announcements that you'd like to share?
I am sure that I do, but I can't remember right now. I think I'm still processing and really just appreciating the conversation and just being able to listen and really take into account everything that you've said right today.
Same. I really appreciate this. I think these are the important conversations that we should definitely continue to have. And yeah, thank you for everybody who joined us today. I see a lot of familiar names out there, so I really appreciate those who continue to join us every month for this lecture series. And thank you, Jazmin, for co-hosting with me. And I'm really excited about this AUA collaboration we have going on. We intersect in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, we'll continue to bring you awesome things and wonderful people doing wonderful work like Washieka.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye, everybody.